Welcome to Debt Matters. Right now, across the UK, thousands of businesses are quietly turning their suppliers into, well, involuntary zero-interest banks.
Yeah, that is exactly what's happening.
Today, we are looking at the growing pressure on companies and, why your invoices might suddenly be taking 60, 90, or even 120 days to clear.
Right. It's a remarkably complex environment to navigate right now.
Because slower economic growth, rising costs, and high insolvency rates are all combining. And it's making it so much harder for businesses to get paid on time.
Absolutely. The pressure isn't just coming from one direction. It is a convergence of multiple economic headwinds hitting all at once.
Yeah.
And for anyone managing a ledger, those headwinds are showing up directly in the payment data.
Which is exactly our mission for today. We want to connect the dots between slowing demand, rising operational costs, and the practical day-to-day realities of credit control.
Right, because the goal is to help you, the listener, really understand why strong credit control and early action on overdue accounts are more crucial than ever right now.
Exactly. I mean, if you think about running a business in the current climate, it really feels a lot like walking up a down escalator.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Companies are putting in far more effort. They're working longer hours just to stay in the exact same place regarding their cash flow.
Yeah, that escalator is definitely moving against them. And to understand why, we have to look at the macroeconomic backdrop.
Right. Let's get into that.
So the OECD recently downgraded the UK's 2026 growth forecast to just 0.7%.
Wow. Under 1%.
Yeah. And at the same time, inflation is expected to rise to 4%.
So we have economic growth totally stalled out while inflation sits at 4%. What does that mathematical gap actually do to the market?
Well, it's a recipe for extreme caution. I mean, when inflation outpaces growth, consumer confidence naturally falls.
Right, people get nervous.
Exactly. Households are spending less, and they are actively choosing to save more.
Because of concerns about inflation, energy prices, all of that.
Yeah, and just general uncertainty. And that behavioral shift translates directly into falling UK retail sales.
But wait, let me just challenge that logic for a second.
Sure.
If households are pulling back on spending and prioritizing saving, doesn't that inherently mean the money is out there? Like it's just sitting in accounts waiting to be spent?
I mean, yes, on a national wealth level. But for creditors and businesses managing day-to-day operations, that delayed timeline is fatal.
Because money sitting in a consumer's savings account doesn't pay a business's current invoices.
Precisely. You have to look at how this impacts the cash conversion cycle. When retail sales soften, the cash inflow to businesses weakens immediately.
The money coming in the front door just drops.
Right. And when a business has less cash coming in, it almost always pushes them to stretch their own payment terms with their suppliers out the back door.
So if a company is waiting longer for consumers to buy their products, they force their own suppliers to wait longer for payment.
That is exactly the mechanism at play.
The supplier essentially becomes an involuntary bank for the business experiencing the cash shortfall.
Yeah, everyone is holding onto their capital for as long as possible to protect their own operations.
Which brings us to a vital part of this conversation. Lower cash coming in from cautious consumers is really only half the equation here.
Right.
We have to look at what happens when that lower revenue collides with the rising internal costs that businesses are legally obligated to pay out.
And those cost burdens hitting businesses right now are rigid. They are completely unavoidable.
Give me an example.
Well, let's look at wages. In sectors like retail and hospitality, wages have actually risen by 18% over the past year.
Wait, 18% in a single year?
Yeah, largely driven by increases in the national minimum wage and various changes in employment law.
I mean, let's really map out how that works practically. For industries like hospitality that already operate on incredibly thin margins, you can't just absorb that.
No, you can't.
And because consumers are cautious, as we just discussed, you can't simply raise the price of a coffee by 18% to cover it. The consumer will just walk away.
That is the core dilemma. Businesses are caught between price-sensitive consumers and legally mandated cost increases.
Right.
And it's not just wages either. Upcoming business rate changes could put up to 340,000 firms at risk.
Wow. And the sectors most exposed to those upcoming business rate changes are exactly the ones we just mentioned, right?
Yeah.
Retail, hospitality, and leisure.
Exactly.
I sort of think of this situation like a vice grip.
The vice grip.
Yeah, like on one side, businesses are facing falling consumer sales, so the revenue is shrinking. On the other side, they face these rigid, unavoidable costs like that 18% higher wage bill and then those business rates.
Right, right.
And the element getting completely crushed in the middle of that vice is the supplier who is just waiting to be paid.
That is exactly the underlying tension. We have to view this impartially, though. I mean, wage increases are undeniably positive for workers.
Absolutely.
But simultaneously, those same increases become an immediate, heavy cash burden for businesses trying to manage tighter margins.
Because when fixed costs rise that sharply, businesses have to prioritize who gets paid.
Yeah, and taxes and wages are legally enforced and immediate.
You can't tell the government you'll pay your business rates next quarter, and you certainly can't tell your employees their paychecks will be 2 weeks late.
Exactly. So smaller suppliers are usually the first to feel the delay.
Because you can ignore an invoice from a vendor for an extra 30 days to ensure payroll clears.
Right. And this cost squeeze naturally leads to broken promises and stretched payment terms. It has become such a pervasive issue that the government is actually trying to step in and manage this behavior.
Yeah, when a behavior starts threatening the broader economy, policy usually attempts to catch up.
Yeah.
So, what are we seeing on the regulatory front here?
Well, there are new government proposals aimed specifically at tackling late payments. Business groups have welcomed ideas like granting stronger powers to the Small Business Commissioner.
Okay, so stronger powers and tighter rules around payment terms. Right?
Yeah, the intention is to create a more robust framework that penalizes chronic late payers.
But let me pose this directly to you, the listener. Because if you are sitting in a credit control department right now, you know this isn't just theory.
No, it's everyday reality.
You're the one making the phone calls, you're hearing the excuses. So, is regulation actually capable of fixing a cash flow problem?
That's the million-dollar question.
If a client genuinely has no cash in their account because retail sales have plummeted and wages have spiked, will a new law magically make them pay you?
And that is the exact concern remaining in the market right now. Enforcement versus survival.
Right.
Legislation can dictate terms, but it cannot print money.
Exactly. A law can say a company must clear an invoice in 30 days, but if their bank account is empty on day 30, the law doesn't clear the funds.
Precisely. There is a very real question about whether these proposals will genuinely improve payment culture or if they are just reforms that sound strong on paper but, failed to change real-world behavior.
Right, because the Small Business Commissioner might get powers to name and shame bad actors.
But if a company is delaying payment simply for survival, public shaming won't generate the funds to pay the debt.
It might just push them further to the brink by damaging their reputation.
Exactly. Which means we have to address what happens when policy fails to enforce quick payments and cash flow completely runs dry.
Right, businesses cross a critical threshold. They move from simply being a late payer to facing actual failure.
And that brings us to the insolvency threat.
Which is growing.
It remains a severe issue. We're seeing continuing failures across multiple sectors and regions. A notable example recently is Westbridge Furniture entering administration.
Right, and that specific case puts around 300 jobs at risk.
Yeah. And it's not an isolated event. Recent watch lists show persistent patterns like 4 administrations and 82 liquidations happening concurrently.
And this data is a glaring red flag for you, the listener.
Absolutely.
Collections teams are no longer just managing administrative late payments. They are dealing with narrowing recovery windows.
And customers whose financial positions are quietly deteriorating behind the scenes.
Right, because routine processes are simply no longer enough.
No, they really aren't. By the time a company formally announces administration, the internal warning signs were likely flashing for months.
Let's talk about those warning signs, actually. Credit controllers hear a million excuses on the phone. The system is down, or the person who signs the checks is on leave.
Yeah, we've all heard those.
In a strong economy, those might be genuine administrative hurdles. But in an environment with 0.7% growth and 18% wage hikes, those excuses are often stalling tactics.
Exactly. It's a business deciding whether to pay you or keep their lights on.
Right. Because cost pressure, weak demand, and insolvency risk are all rising at the exact same time, getting paid is now heavily dependent on faster decision-making and much earlier interventions.
That is the core reality of the market right now. If you wait for the routine 90-day mark to escalate an unpaid invoice, the company might already be in liquidation.
The window is shrinking.
Rapidly.
Mhm.
Today, delayed payments are often a symptom of structural cash starvation.
So let's summarize the core takeaways we have connected today for the listener.
Sure.
First, weaker economic growth makes payment delays fundamentally more likely across the board.
Second, the combination of higher wage bills and fixed costs are hurting cash flow from the inside out. They soak up whatever revenue does come in.
Third, sectors like retail, hospitality, and leisure are highly exposed right now.
And finally, rising insolvency risk makes recovering aged debt much harder. Once a company crosses that line, your unpaid invoice essentially becomes an unsecured long-shot claim.
Right, so early intervention is the only viable strategy. Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder. We have established that spotting financial distress early is now the absolute critical factor in getting paid.
Yeah.
So, will the future of debt collection rely less on chasing overdue invoices after the fact and more on utilizing predictive AI to analyze a client's subtle behavioral changes?
Oh, that is a compelling frontier.
Yeah.
Think about what predictive models could monitor before an invoice even becomes due.
Like shifts in order frequency. Are they suddenly ordering smaller batches because they don't have the cash to hold inventory?
Exactly. Or what about analyzing communication patterns?
Imagine an AI analyzing email tone.
Right. If an accounts payable contact who usually replies in 2 hours suddenly takes 3 days, or starts raising highly unusual disputes over trivial details just to stall the payment process.
Could AI flag those behavioral shifts as a high insolvency risk before an invoice is ever technically missed?
It changes the entire paradigm, from reactive collection to proactive risk management.
It is something every credit team should be thinking about. Because right now, you cannot afford to just stand still on that down escalator. You have to be anticipating the next step.
Keep a close eye on those early warning signs and do not let those invoices age.
We'll catch you on the next one.